going to shift gears slightly and focus now on the importance of protecting natural assets, because going hand in hand with tourism and going hand in hand with the growth of the sector is protecting the assets. So environmental protection is very critical. Seychelles, of course, is focused on this. Give us some insight into some of the initiatives from that perspective, and what you can share with us in terms of how you've been able to protect tourism as well as your natural assets.
Thank you for the question, Samantha. Actually, I think you've addressed the question to the right person. Seychelles, we've had an environmental management plan for over 2 decades now. We actually, when we started with the initiatives, we were amongst the first country in the world, really, to start with it, whereby it was quite detailed and it was across sectors, not only for one sector, but all sectors of the economy was covered. Even the education program, the education bit as well, was included in there. And we have seen over the years that it has really bring us a lot of return, because the kind of tourism we promote in Seychelles, we feel that our assets, our beaches, our mountains, it's worth more in its natural state than being exploited for any other reasons. So this is why we do give a lot of attention to nature conservation. Actually, over 50% of our landmass, though it's really tiny and really small, it's afforded protection by an environmental degree. And again, this again have spilled over into our successes in tourism, being able to attract the right kind of tourism, because it's people who really want to enjoy this nature at its most pristine. Also, additionally, I think because of the diversity of our islands, it gives us a lot more to showcase. So I feel that this is an area where being part of the initiatives, we can share on the story and things we've been able to do to promote our environment together with tourism, the right kind of tourism. And while, because we are in an investment seminar, in terms of development, how we've been able to go about it, that we don't see ourselves looking like destinations like, for example, Bali, where there's so much development. We've had very conservative policies, which I would say to some extent, investors felt we were a little bit too conservative. We've had to relook at it, but at the same time, keeping the vision and the goal in focus, because we wanted to ensure that while tourism, it is our mainstay, we need it for our bread and butter, but we need to ensure there's a future generation coming that needs to enjoy what we have enjoyed at the same time, and we need the tourism to be sustainable at the same time. It's not just for now, it needs to go on for years and years, and if this is the way we are actually getting the bread, we cannot kill the goose that's laying the golden egg.
Exactly, and as you say, it's all about sustainable tourism and protecting the assets which provide that tourism income. So from a KwaZulu-Natal perspective, there are 2 heritage sites in your province, the Isimangaliso Wetland Park and Drakensberg Mountain Range. So how does the prioritization of conservation fit in with the broader tourism master plan of the province?
Well, I think the two are I think there is a very, very clear nexus between conservation and tourism promotion. For us, we want to refer to this as natural capital. It is important that any society and any nation should preserve its natural capital. It is this capital, particularly when it comes to nature and our natural resources, that we must then preserve. And hence, therefore, you have got those 2 World Heritage Sites that you have mentioned, this Mangaliso Wetland Park, as well as the Drakensberg Ukahlamba Maloti Heritage Site. But the second thing for us is that within that, it is important that we also win the battle against rhino poaching. And for us, it is important because one of the things when we look at the numbers, why Sub-Saharan Africa was growing, even when the other parts of the world were declining in terms of tourism attraction, is that part of the element is that we in the Sub-Saharan Africa have got safaris, which many parts of the world do not have. We owe it, therefore, that asset, natural asset, capital asset, that is the preservation of the big five, particularly the rhino in this particular instance, is important, and therefore that what we need to share as well within the region is the same kind of approach and zeal and focus in the protection of those species so that they don't become extinct for future generations. The third part for us is that it is important as well because, you know, we live with the ecosystems, and there's no way we can actually overload the ecosystem. Now I'm talking about our stunning beaches. We've got a more than 600-kilometer coastline. It is important that we use them in a manner, as my sister from the Seychelles has indicated, that we are able to preserve it for future generations. And in this particular instance, it is important, therefore, that we have now passed a policy around beach management, but we also have introduced standards which are globally acceptable standards through the blue flags. We now have got a number of KZN beaches which are now have been accorded the blue flag status. And that was clearly indicate that we are in the right direction because we now have a policy that actually clearly stipulates that it makes it easier for us to manage those resources and to manage them and to ensure that we do not have an oversubscription in those natural resources. But the last point for me is that I think for us, being in this continent, we must then take pride that we do have this very beauty. And that is why in the Eastern route, we actually, the name itself, East, represents other names. It represents cultural exchange on culture and heritage. It represents ensuring that we are able, of course, to have adventure tourism. It represents the scenery, which is very beautiful. It represents trade. So all of these things would constitute the East, which actually is the name Eastern route, simply says to us, at the core of that is our natural resources.
Thank you for that. I'd like to invite our audience now to ask our panel questions, and please, just in terms of procedure, if you could just introduce yourself, where you're from, and then direct your question to one of our panelists, or you can ask a general question and I'll be able to direct the question for you. You've got a microphone on your desk in front of you. If you don't, please just put your hand up and we'll get a roving mic to you. So if we could have the first question for our group here today, please. Just a reminder, if you could please keep your questions short and sharp, and just kind of keep it very brief, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Thabang Mofokeng. I'm coming from South Africa. Thank you very much for those thought-provoking sentiments regarding the investments in these countries. My question will be very short. In relation to the regional trade agreements that have been advocated in most western part of the world, there's been some big mitigating challenges, which some have been pinpointed this morning during the morning sessions regarding the trade barriers. And we just would love to know is how can the government of the involved countries be able to integrate the solutions involving the PPE model, of course, working with the organized business like your Chamber of Commerce's as a platform to ignite a veritable spiral towards the investment as well as the tourism sectors, which has been identified. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Director General, if I could just throw that question to you, because I think it's also an important, from a context where Swaziland is the smallest economy here, and there's also that balancing act of a need to protect a domestic economy. So what is your thought in terms of opening up trade across the barriers here and reducing those barriers, as well as also ensuring that you don't open it up too soon in the local economy?
Thank you very much indeed, Samantha, for that thought-provoking comment. What we may want to mention is that on the agenda that we have, we do have structures like the Federation of Swaziland Employers and indeed others. And the balance, I think, becomes critically important because in the first instance, you do want to develop a local industry. But at the same time, you may also be looking into issues of getting foreign direct investment, and indeed you may find that some of the people that we are working with in the region have got an interest, and we do then have to open up. But then I think it's just a question of balance, and indeed we are working through other organizations in the region which can assist in terms of making sure that we balance, we work together, and that local industry develops, but we don't get overexposure perhaps, but overprotectionism may not be an idea. I think we do have to open up, but balance. Thank you.
Another question from the floor, please.
O meu nome é Alexandre Schur, venho de Moçambique, sou jornalista. Eu gostaria de saber o que é que vai ser feito
What
daqui para
is going to
frente
be done
nesta iniciativa de Three Routes. Vai
with
continuar
this
a
three-route
decorrer
initiative
nestes moldes
in
ou
these
vai ter
molds,
uma
or
outra
is it going to
imagem,
have another image now
nas
that
próximas ocasiões?
we have the Seychelles, isn't it?
The
Okay.
question was, what will be happening with these three routes? Will we continue in this concept, or will we change? I think was that.
MEC, as someone who has really been at the forefront of driving this, tell us about the vision for where the East 3 route is going.
Our approach around the Eastern route is that we clearly have an objective of, at the moment, of talking about the 4 members of the Eastern route. We don't know what is going to happen, whether any other country would actually want to apply for the Eastern route, and whether when that application comes before the meeting of the principals of the Eastern route, whether that application would be considered favorable. We cannot predict that beforehand. However, what we would want to see out of the Eastern route, as we said, we want to actually grow the Eastern route within what is existing now. And we're talking about what we know. We can't talk about what we think might happen, because it may depend on circumstances. And from where we stand, clearly we want to ensure that there is bigger numbers of tourists that come into this route. We want to see, particularly now, in the tourism trade, we want to see packages that are now selling the route, and therefore are telling people what you can get in KwaZulu-Natal, in Swaziland, in Mozambique, in the Seychelles. And it is possible for the tourism sector and the private sector to sell those packages, to start therefore opening the route to the public at large. The third part, of course, we want to see within this route is huge investments. And on the area of investment, we're very clear that we're not only focusing on attracting institutional investors, but we're also focusing on accessing what we call smart capital, which would actually be also accessible to your small end investment as well as to your medium upper end investment. So that you don't only focus on big and mega projects alone only, but you also are able to diversify your investment portfolio to cover even your smaller type of investments.
So while we're on that note, smaller investments and creating that conducive environment for smaller investors, what are you doing from a provincial perspective to encourage that?
From where we are, for instance, at our own level, I think we do have our own funds. We've got the KwaZulu-Natal KZN Growth Fund, which is our own fund. We are still dealing with Fund 1. We have got the Itala Development Finance Corporation. The CEO is here, which are actually able to invest there. We've got the ITC, Industrial Development Corporation. We also have got the National Economic Empowerment Fund. So from the KZN and South African perspective, we have a lot of resources in that regard that can be able to consider applications from investors at that particular level, and where we're also focusing on tourism, but also other sectors of the economy. But we also want to not only look domestically, we want now to go outward and to look at international level. And hence, therefore, we would be next year, we will then be actually hosting a 1.5 or 2-day investment conference, which will be replacing the HICA conference, where we just want to focus now as Eastern route. Our focal point there will be how do we now access the smart capital. We have now actually had discussion with the ICTP, led by Professor Jeffrey Lippman, who then have actually identified a number of interested parties in the world who are keen to partner with us in the Eastern Route to invest on a smart capital using technology. And we think it should be possible that for an investor in Swaziland, an investor who is, or a person who wants to have a project in Swaziland, a person who wants to have a project in Mozambique, even in the Seychelles, if those projects have been approved and have gone through the national approval processes, it should now be possible for them to find other alternative funders, not only those who are traditional funders. So from where we stand, we think we want to take this route. But the last point for me is in the area of trade. The reason why, when you look at what we are doing with this investment conference here in Swaziland, and along it is the question of exhibition. For us, we must promote trade between these countries, but also we must ensure that we encourage our people who have initiative, who are producing certain products, to be able to find market of those. They must find market of some of the products in KwaZulu-Natal from Mozambique, find market of some of the product of these from the Swaziland in KwaZulu-Natal, so is the Seychelles, so vice versa. Now, we can only do so again when we say those smaller people who are actually trying to do their best, we also link them to the investment in the private sector and the hotels in this instance, so that they also can be able to have some of their products being actually showcased and sold in those hotels. In that regard, we therefore will make tourism to benefit us all. And that is our prime goal in this route, is to see the improvement of the quality of life of both the investors, but also of the ordinary people.
Thank you for that. So one last question from the floor, please.
Thank you, Watembe, South Africa. My question is directed to Mozambican government. How soon can we expect the road linking Maputo and Kosi Bay as part of SDI completed? Obrigado.
As was said by His Excellency, the Minister Mabuyakhulu, we said in Bileni 2 days ago that by 2017 we will have that road. Not only, we will also have the bridge between Katembe and Maputo. Now we are busy in building the roads, circular roads around Maputo. It will make also easier even to the people who are using Namasha and Goba to go around suburb areas. Yes, we are very keen in work on that, but 2017, hopefully we'll be opening champagne.
It's 2017. There we go. You have committed to the date, so we will touch base then. We're just going to wrap up now and just get closing comments from each of you. And if I may just start with you, Mr. Mkhonta, because we've spoken about a number of topics here, you know, ranging from environmental protection, of course, which is very important, but across the board, opening up trade, still protecting local industry. From Swaziland's perspective, tell us about the priority sectors that you see the need to focus on right now, and just any closing comments to wrap this up for us.
Thank you, Samantha. Taking it from the discussions and suggestions which came up this morning, it did appear from the participants that we do have to focus on what in codes they refer to as barriers. I think the barriers together we should try to overcome. The barriers cover areas such as immigration formalities. The barriers cover even other areas which I needn't mention. I think we do have these on the agenda, and indeed, as Honorable Mabuyakhulu indicated, I think at our next round of discussions, I think we should be focusing on addressing some of these. And on the environmental scene, I should mention that in Swaziland, we happen to be lucky that tourism and environment are housed under the same ministry. And we have entities that are dealing with tourism. We also have got parastatals as well that are assisting the ministry with some of these, and indeed the preservation of the environment and the beauty is critically important, and it will be ensured through the structures that we have, such as the Swaziland National Trust Commission, as the Swaziland Environment Authority and others. They are critically important.
Well, we've got a minute left for each of our three speakers. So, MEC, what can we reasonably expect to have progressed on by this time next year in 2014?
Well, one of the things we would be making a final decisions on is that for us, this must be about, first and foremost, ensuring that we grow the numbers, we continue to market this route and this region aggressively. Secondly, it must also be about that we would have actually finalized, and possibly would announce that by Saturday, how we would actually fund the East route going forward, and be able to make that decision, which we will do so. The third thing is that for us is that this route must be about touching the lives of ordinary people. We want to see quite a lot of work being done, the social responsibility investment programs that must actually be touching and improving the quality of the life of people and leaving legacy sustainable tourism projects, but also developing the infrastructure for the communities where this route is. The last part for us is about ensuring that we become a learning countries. We learn from one another. We share the best practice, but above all, we're able to talk to one another where we think there could be impediments that can slow down some of the achievements that we could achieve together. So from that point of view, we are clear that where we think there are issues we need to talk about, we have a platform where we can talk about at the level of government to governments and be able to share those. But the last part for me is that I want to see more of the private sector driven initiatives coming out of this route. And those are the packages, and those are the investments, and those are the areas where private sector can now use the East Route platform, not only to put the investment map, projects into the investment map of the East Route, but also private sector linking themselves up and doing business together. That is the area I want to see.
And from our newest member to the East 3 route, a final comment from you, Ms. Naiken.
For my final comment, what I have to say is, I think I would go on what MEC have shared today, is tourism should be broad-based, inclusive, and the benefits should trickle down into the economy and not for the lucky few on the tops. And through this is where the importance of removing barriers for ease of doing business, because our little people, they need to be able to put up their investment and for them to benefit from the tourism coming into the country. And while talking on barriers, I totally agree we need to deal with the visa issues. I think among us members, it should be very seamless for us to go into one state to the other, and even for the tourists visiting. I'm proud to say Seychelles, we do not have visa, so we're friends of everybody, enemy of none.
Well, on the back of that, we'll just finally end off with a perspective from Mozambique, if you may, for us, Director General.
Well, the perspectives are good, and what I can say as last words is that let us continue in this joint work, as we believe that these 3 routes will really make a positive difference in the products development along the routes that we go along, in the investment attractions, as we are getting more and more business people to join us through investment conferences and seminars, and also on the human resource development. When we host ourselves, it means that we pose a challenge to ourselves in terms of service. When you serve food, you learn from each other. Instead of giving this side, give it on that one. This is an open school, even for our people. I do believe that we will continue with those challenges, those decisions to be taken. among the countries, but the future is there.
Thank you so much for that today, and of course thank you so much for joining us. I'll just start off by thanking you from left to right, and starting with Sibusiso Mkhonta. He is the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Tourism and Environmental Affairs for Swaziland. Thank you to you. MEC Michael Mabuyakhulu, who is the MEC for Economic Development and Tourism in KwaZulu-Natal. Sherin Naiken, Chief Executive of the Seychelles Tourism Board, and Hiune Abacar, Director General for the Mozambique Tourism Authority at Inatur in Mozambique. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you very much for joining us from our delegates. And of course, MEC, we look forward to seeing you next year and talking about what progress has been made with the inclusion of the Seychelles. And that's it for this third edition of the East 3 route, being held here in Manzini, Swaziland. Thank you so much for tuning in. From myself, Samantha Loring, and all of us here in Swaziland, it's goodbye.